Let me be completely honest with you before this video goes any further. I'm not doing this because it is practical. I'm not doing this because I think you should follow my example. I am not doing this because DOS is secretly a superior operating system that the technology industry has been deliberately hiding from mainstream users for 30 years while pushing increasingly bloated modern alternatives on an unsuspecting public that never asked for any of it. I am doing this because 6 weeks ago I made a bet with a friend over dinner that I could use DOS as my only computing environment for 30 consecutive days and actually accomplish meaningful real work inside it every single day without quietly reverting to Windows when things became difficult or inconvenient. The bet was entirely his idea. He was absolutely certain I would last 4 days at most before the absence of a proper web browser, a modern office suite, and basic contemporary conveniences forced me back to familiar ground. And what happened over those 30 days was so genuinely unexpected, so surprisingly educational, and so oddly enjoyable in ways I had not anticipated at any point during my preparation that I felt a genuine obligation to document it honestly and completely. Because spending 30 days inside an operating system from 1981 in the year 2026 turns out to be less a story about nostalgia and more a story about what we have gained over 4 decades of computing progress, what we have quietly surrendered along the way without anyone explicitly asking our permission, and what happens to your relationship with technology when you strip everything down to the absolute minimum and force yourself to understand every single thing your computer is doing because the environment provides nothing to hide it from you. Let me begin with the basic question of what DOS actually is for anyone watching who was not computing in the 1980s and has only encountered the word in old hacker movies or vintage technology documentaries. DOS stands for Disk Operating System, and the version most people associate with the name is MS-DOS, which was Microsoft's implementation that powered IBM-compatible personal computers through most of the 1980s and well into the 1990s before Windows gradually displaced it as the primary computing environment for ordinary users worldwide. DOS has no graphical interface of any kind. There are no windows, no icons arranged on a desktop, no mouse cursor moving across a colorful background, no taskbar, no notification center, no application launcher, no settings panels filled with toggles and sliders. There's a black screen with a blinking cursor and a text prompt waiting patiently for you to type a command. The entire interaction model consists of typing the name of something you want to do and pressing enter. That is everything. There is no hidden layer beneath it, and no additional complexity waiting to be discovered through the right gesture or the right menu. What you see is the complete and total picture of what exists on the screen. The version I used for this experiment was FreeDOS, which is a free and open source implementation of DOS that a dedicated community of developers has been actively maintaining for years, and that runs on modern hardware, without requiring vintage equipment or original software media from 3 decades ago. FreeDOS is fully compatible with the enormous library of software written for MS-DOS during its commercial peak, which means the complete catalog of DOS applications and games from the late 1980s and early 1990s is accessible on contemporary hardware without any emulation layer required. I installed it on an older laptop that had been sitting unused in a closet, a machine that Windows 11 ran on adequately but without any enthusiasm or spare performance headroom. The first thing that happened after installation completed was that the system booted to a working command prompt in approximately 4 seconds from pressing the power button. Not 50 seconds, not 20 seconds, 4 seconds from cold power off to a fully operational environment ready to accept commands. I sat with that number for a moment and thought carefully about how thoroughly we have normalized the idea that waiting nearly a minute for a computer to become usable is simply the unavoidable price of operating a modern machine with modern software. The first week required learning the command vocabulary that DOS uses to navigate and operate. And I want to describe this honestly, rather than dramatizing the difficulty or dismissively pretending it was trivial for someone with no prior DOS experience. The fundamental commands are genuinely learnable in a single afternoon of deliberate practice. dir displays the contents of a directory. cd moves between directories. Copy copies files from one location to another. del removes files. Edit opens a basic text editor. MD creates new directories. These cover the substantial majority of file management operations that make up most of what any computer user actually does with their file system on any given day. The more advanced operations involving batch files and system configuration took longer and required reading documentation and forum posts from communities of DOS enthusiasts who have kept this knowledge alive and organized and accessible. But the specific quality of the learning that DOS demands is different in an important way from learning to navigate a graphical interface. And that difference surprised me more than the learning curve itself. Every command I learned felt permanently and solidly mine in a way that graphical interface knowledge rarely does. When you understand that dir displays directory contents because you typed it deliberately and saw exactly what resulted, you possess a complete and unambiguous understanding of what happened and why. There is no gesture that might or might not work depending on context. There is no menu item whose location shifts between software versions. There is a command, and there is its result, and the relationship between them is completely and permanently transparent. My daily work involves writing primarily long-form documents and scripts of various kinds, alongside spreadsheet management, research, and communication tasks. I want to be genuinely honest about how each of these went in the DOS environment, because intellectual honesty requires acknowledging what worked and what did not, rather than constructing a narrative of unqualified success or unqualified struggle that serves neither the truth nor anyone watching. Writing worked remarkably well and was the area that surprised me most positively across the entire 30 days. I used WordStar, the dominant word processing application of the DOS era, and after approximately 3 days of internalizing its keyboard command system, I found myself writing with a quality of sustained focus that modern writing environments make increasingly difficult to achieve and maintain. The explanation is straightforward when you think it through. There's nothing in the DOS writing environment competing for your attention except the text you are producing. No formatting toolbar tempting you to spend 20 minutes adjusting typography when you should be developing arguments. No grammar suggestions appearing beneath phrases and redirecting your attention from content to mechanics. No notifications arriving from entirely unrelated sources and breaking the thread of thought you were in the middle of developing. No cloud sync indicator flashing, no update prompt appearing. There's a cursor, and there is text, and there is complete silence from every direction except the work itself, and the quality of writing that emerges from that environment reflects the quality of attention the environment makes possible. Spreadsheet work was handled through Lotus 1, 2, 3, the application that dominated business computing before Excel existed, and using it after years of Excel and Google Sheets was a revealing experience for reasons extending well beyond any nostalgic appreciation for vintage software. Lotus 1, 2, 3 loads in under 2 seconds. It responds to every keystroke with zero perceptible delay. It never pauses to synchronize anything to a cloud server, check for available updates, display a promotional message about premium subscription features, or request permission to access additional services. It performed this specific task it was built to perform with an immediacy and reliability that makes the constant small delays and interruptions of modern productivity software feel like a deliberate design choice rather than an inevitable characteristic of capable tools. The functional gap between what Lotus 1, 2, 3 can accomplish and what Excel can accomplish is enormous, and I'm not suggesting anyone adopt it for serious contemporary spreadsheet work. But the experience of using software that does one thing immediately and without overhead clarified something important about what the overhead of modern software is actually costing us in the daily texture of our computing experience across every session of every working day. Internet access and email required the most creative problem solving, and I want to be fully transparent about the compromises I made, because presenting the experiment as cleaner than it actually was would undermine the honesty that makes the account worth your time. Text mode web browsers exist for FreeDOS, and Lynx in particular is considerably more capable than most people expect before they actually use it. The textual content of a substantial portion of the web renders completely and usably through Lynx, including news articles, Wikipedia entries, documentation pages, blog posts, and most informational content that does not depend on visual or interactive elements for its core value. What does not work includes anything built around JavaScript applications, streaming video, image-dependent navigation interfaces, and modern authentication systems. I handle tasks requiring a modern browser by allowing myself one short daily session on my phone, a compromise my friend accepted as within the reasonable spirit of the original bet, since phone use had not been explicitly prohibited when we made the agreement. Gaming was one of the unexpected genuine highlights of the 30 days. And it deserves honest recognition rather than being treated as a peripheral curiosity that does not belong in a serious account. The DOS game library from the late 1980s and early 1990s is extraordinary in ways that are genuinely easy to forget when you are surrounded by modern games, with photorealistic graphics and massive production budgets and live service components. Civilization, Doom, Transport, Tycoon, Master of Orion, Commander Keen, Eye of the Beholder, Quake. These games run natively on FreeDOS and remain genuinely entertaining in 2026 in ways that reflect the quality of their underlying design rather than the sophistication of their visual presentation. Spending several evenings playing Civilization on a machine that loads the game in under 3 seconds, runs it at a perfectly smooth frame rate, and makes absolutely no demands on my attention. Beyond my genuine engagement with the game's own systems was more relaxing and more absorbing than most of my recent sessions with contemporary games designed explicitly around retention metrics and engagement. optimization algorithms. There is something clarifying about entertainment that asks nothing of you except your attention and your engagement with what is actually in front of you. And experiencing that quality again after years away from it was more meaningful than I had anticipated before the experiment. The performance dimension of the 30 days affected me philosophically in ways that have genuinely persisted beyond the experiment itself, and that I find myself thinking about regularly while using modern software. FreeDOS on the older laptop consumed so little of the machine's resources that the concept of the computer feeling slow simply ceased to have any applicable meaning across all 30 days without exception. Every operation completed before I had consciously finished the thought of initiating it. The machine felt not just fast, but unconditionally and effortlessly fast, in a way that no modern operating system running on any hardware I have used in recent years has managed to produce. The explanation requires no mystery or complicated technical analysis. The operating system consumes virtually nothing because it runs virtually nothing you did not request. There are no background telemetry services transmitting your behavioral data to a remote server, no AI inference operations, running continuously to generate commercial signals, no update checking processes, consuming processor cycles, no security suite maintaining real-time file system monitoring, no cloud connectivity services maintaining persistent connections to infrastructure you never consciously enrolled in. Nothing runs at any moment except exactly and precisely what you have explicitly started by typing its name and pressing enter. Every resource the machine possesses is completely available for your work because nothing else has claimed any portion of those resources for its own purposes that are separate from yours. At the end of the 30 days, I booted into Windows on a different machine to compare the experience with freshly calibrated perceptions after a month away. The contrast was striking in both directions simultaneously. Windows felt genuinely rich and capable and full of real conveniences I had missed in specific and concrete ways. The ability to visit any website without creative workarounds. The ability to join video calls without constructing alternative solutions. The ability to work with images and formatted content and multimedia without elaborate adaptations. These are genuine capabilities delivering genuine value, and I appreciated them with a clarity and freshness that months of previous daily use had made completely invisible through familiarity. Windows also felt immediately and unmistakably heavy, presumptuous, and busy in ways I had thoroughly stopped noticing before the experiment began. Within the first 5 minutes of the Windows session, I received 3 unsolicited notifications I had not asked for, observed 2 promotional interface elements I had not requested, watched the task manager show over 3.5 gigabytes of RAM consumed by background processes before I had opened a single application myself, and experienced the specific and familiar sensation of an operating system running its own ongoing agenda in parallel with whatever I was attempting to accomplish. That sensation, which I had normalized completely over years of daily exposure, was immediately jarring after 30 days of its complete and total absence. I am not recommending that you switch to DOS, and I want to state that plainly because the overall tone of my description might suggest otherwise, and I prefer directness. DOS is not a practical primary computing environment for most people in 2026, and the genuine limitations I have described are real barriers that affect real work in real ways. What I am suggesting is that the questions this experiment surfaced are worth taking seriously, regardless of whether you ever touch DOS yourself, because those questions apply directly and immediately to the choices you are making about your computing environment right now on modern hardware every single day. How much background overhead are you accepting in exchange for the conveniences that overhead provides, and have you ever made that trade-off consciously and deliberately? Who are the background processes on your machine actually working for at this exact moment? Does the operating system you depend on every day serve your interests as its primary function, or does it extract from you in the form of data, attention, and processing resources in exchange for the services it provides? These questions became sharper and more personally answerable for me after 30 days in DOS than any amount of reading about privacy and computing philosophy had previously managed to achieve, because experiencing an alternative directly, rather than reading about it, theoretically, produces a different and more lasting quality of clarity. The bet cost me 1 dinner at a restaurant of my friend's choosing. The perspective it produced has been worth considerably more than that. Subscribe for more honest and sometimes unconventional explorations of the technology we use and the assumptions we have quietly stopped questioning about it.